Welcome. My name is Paola Pristini. We're so happy to have you here today. Welcome to the New Works Composer Sessions, our final part of the Digital Discovery Festival. I'm a composer and the co-founder here at Sawdust, and I'll be your host for this 9-part series designed for composers and musicians and deeply curious music lovers. Our guests range from critics to museum leaders, from composers to instrumentalists, an intellectual property lawyer who will provide insights and tools for developing various skills and thought models for artists working today. We have our 20 winners of the New Works Composer Commission on this Zoom, and each week 3 of them will participate in the latter part of the discussion with questions they have prepared. You can hear their music on December 10th and 11th, written specifically for the Jack Quartet and the National Sawdust Ensemble. So a little bit about our esteemed guests today. Praised by the Chicago Tribune as minutely crafted and utterly lovely, the New York Times as whimsical and surreal, and the Washington Post as deeply and darkly poetic, the music of Brazilian composer Marcos Balter is at once emotionally visceral and intellectually complex, primarily rooted in experimental manipulations of timbre and hyper-dramatization of live performance. Past honors include fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, Vitella Ranieri Foundation, and the Tanglewood Music Center, where he was a Leonard Bernstein Fellow. He's an associate professor of music composition at Montclair State University, and recently he was appointed to UC San Diego Department of Music Composition faculty. Today, we're going to actually be talking to him about collective structures and how collaboration, cooperation, and reimagining hierarchical methods in music can lead to a more equitable future. We're so honored to have him. Marcos, please join me.
Hi, Paola.
Hi, my friend. Nice to see you.
So good to see you, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you to National Sawdust for organizing this.
Thank you, Marcos. It's a joy, and I'm excited that we have our fellows listening in. And I couldn't imagine a more beautiful soul to launch this series. You are such an extraordinary composer and thinker, and a real leader in our field. So I'm thrilled. It's an honor to have you.
You're too generous, but thank you. It's a pleasure to be talking to all of you here. And it's the Zoom time, so I hope everything runs smoothly. But if not, I apologize in advance for any kind of technical mishap. I'm gonna try to be my most efficient and slick. But today, what I would like to start by saying is that this is not intended to be a lecture in the sense that I'm coming to you with answers to problems. What I would like to do is to talk about my experience and my quest on thinking about these issues, from a perspective of, a practitioner, and also as a student, as someone who, watches and listens to a lot of music and a lot of artwork and is thinking about those things in an active and hopefully fully engaged way. I prepared a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation for us, just to sort of guide our conversation in the most effective way. I have a few clips of some musical examples, so hopefully it's not going to be too dry. So let us see if I can do this right. So yes, collective structures, and the idea being that composition, in my opinion, is never a solitary activity. That even when we are by ourselves in our rooms, sort of conceptualizing ideas, we are thinking of at least one more person, on the experiential level or on a more practical realizational level. So on thinking about, the collective intrinsic value of composition, I have found very important to take these elements of collectivity into consideration on how I formalize my ideas. So to start with, I would like to show a little bit of a clip of a documentary that I did with my friends from Y Music and the choreographers Beauty John and Diane McIntyre on a collaboration from 2014. So this is clip number 1.
When I met Marcos, he was introduced to me as Brazilian. And at that time, I was thinking a lot about what the people who work in the contemporary avant-garde progressive art world, most people are not people of color. I was trying to find a way to get basic with him. Let's talk as two people who are not white people. Let's talk about, where are you from?
We talked a lot about where we came from, who we were, and how our stories were
I was
confusing.
confused about whether my home was really the Cleveland environment or the New York City environment.
When we had our initial conversations, they were not that different. When I talked to Bill and when I talked to Diane, and when we decided that we were going to frame the piece around the concept of home.
And for him, that home had many different layers.
It was really interesting how these three very different experiences of these three Black artists with completely different histories, even understanding of what being Black is.
This piece is a journey, and through the journey, we fly.
The whole piece is based on this chant, this Yoruba chant in Yoruba itself that talks about, a father or my father, which can be seen as a literal father or, some higher being, either coming into one's home or you going towards, your father's home. So I wanted to create this sense of ascension, this gradual ascension, this long trance. And when I saw Diane dancing, and when I saw her dressed in white, and the gestures that she was doing, around the musicians, she looked like she was, sort of receiving that spirit. And, and the dance itself really looked like what you would see in an Umbanda or Candomblé ritual. When I saw Bill's work for the first time, I was very surprised, but I could understand why Bill saw the piece the way that he did. In my case, it was very much connected to my ancestors in Brazil, the idea of slavery, as being sort of a confinement that can be seen as home or a forced home, and the idea of not belonging to where you are, which I also sort of connected to my own story. And then when I saw Bill sort of recontextualizing that and really talking very overtly about African American struggles in the U.S., especially, like issues surrounding, police violence and unjust incarceration. I understood it. It was still about oppression. It was still about persecution of minorities. It was still about feeling constrained.
Art, music, is going to be one of the ways we fight back the darkness of this moment.
This is my fifth prayer today.
So maybe all you have to do is do more, enable us to fly.
Going down, Captain.
Maybe you just have to play heartbreakingly beautiful and fierce and intelligent. All right, one music, throw down.
So this was just to give you a little bit of context. The process was Bill, Diane, and I, came up with the idea of talking about home as like where we come from, and then we all went our separate ways. I composed the music in very close collaboration with my music. We tested sounds. We sort of labbed, textures, and put the music together. Then we gave the music to both Bill and Diane, and there were 4 performances performances. Bill was first and third days, and Diane was second and fourth days. And they intentionally did not talk to one another and came up with their own concepts of what the music was. And as you can see in the video, when their concepts came back to us and we compared them, they couldn't be more different. And at the same time, they couldn't be more true to what the music did, which, takes me to this idea that collaboration itself, the idea of what collaboration and cooperation can be, is flexible. Just to sort of give us a little bit more parameters here, I did a little tab of what I consider intrinsic parts of collaboration and cooperation. So collaboration tends to be synchronous, where cooperation tends to be asynchronous. And what do I mean when I say that? In collaboration, all of the parties involved are usually sitting at the same table at the same time. And the process follows the same kind of linearity and temporality throughout all the parties. In cooperation, though, you have a chain. You have things that happen at different stages, and maybe sometimes the participants in the cooperative chain don't even take part in every single element of that chain. Collaboration, by nature, tends to be non-hierarchical in the sense that everybody is a shareholder, is an equal shareholder, since they are sort of taking part in every single step of the process. Cooperation, though, is hierarchical. And I should say that when I say hierarchical, I'm not necessarily talking about power structure. I'm talking about roles, which, there's a distinction to be marked there, so people have specific roles, and those roles have levels of dependency on other roles as well. Collaboration tends to be morphing. Collaboration tends to be transformative, as it goes, as you talk about it. Whereas cooperation, just as to make it as effective, as efficient as possible, tends to be very well defined. People know what they're supposed to do. And finally, collaboration is by nature interdependent. All of the parties are, connected, and they need each other in order for the whole to exist. And cooperation is a little bit more independent. You do your part, towards the whole. Now, what is the ideal situation? In my opinion, the ideal situation is neither nor. The ideal situation sort of, is an ebb and flow between the two of them. I know that when we talk about artistic endeavors, we tend to think of collaboration as better than cooperation. And I honestly, very rarely come across a project that is presented as collaborative that does not have cooperative elements within it. And I just wish that people were more explicit about it, because the more explicit you are about it, the more in depth you can examine, how those things manifest themselves into the idea. So as I work, as I develop my work, as I develop my practice, I've been really spending a lot of time thinking of it. And perhaps the project that I spent the most time thinking of it, or perhaps the most challenging collaborative and cooperative project that I have had the pleasure of being part of, was my project with flutist Claire Chase, electronic musician and percussionist Leva Lorenzo, and theater director Doug Fitch, called Pan. And what we tried to do with Pan was to question the traditional structure in which we think of producing a work, in which you have the author that comes up with an idea and comes up with the material, and then that author gives it to the performer, and the performer realizes it and presents to the listener. What we wanted to create was somehow a network that was much more like this, in which all of the parts of this tripartite structure could coexist and could be in direct dialogue with one another. So the idea behind Pan was that the work would incorporate performers, would incorporate individuals from all backgrounds, and regardless of training, regardless of their language, regardless of physical abilities, that it would really be as inclusive as possible. And the goal was to not compromise sophistication, quote unquote, of the concept within the process. And I gotta say, once we started going into it, it became very clear to us that we did not have either the language or the tools to do that, because that's just not something that we do a lot on creating artworks. We talk about it a lot of times. We talk about audience participation, for instance, or community building and all of those, this hot, terms, but they tend to exist superficially. When you put them into the fabric of the work as an integral, not only integral, but a vital part of what the work is, you start to see your own deficiencies, the deficiencies of your tools. So we did Pan with a variety of people, like the musicians were in many places. We did it in the south side of Chicago with public school students. We've done it people from retirement centers. We've done it with the Riceboro Center in Brooklyn. This has been done abroad. And every time that we put it together, the work morphed. The work continued to morph. And what I thought it was really beautiful about it coming out of this experience is that Pan was written as a process. The piece itself, the formation of the work itself is a process, and the process is not really finite. It's an infinite process. Every time that it's done, there is a new element that comes into it. And even the people who participate on Pan, they tend to come back in different roles. So there were some stages in that, some people came in as quote unquote non-musicians or untrained musicians, and they were there as apprentices. And then on a second or a third incarnation of the work, they came back as, teachers, people who knew that structure really well and could orally transmit their knowledge to other people. So that was quite beautiful. And this sort of fluidity on the hierarchical distribution is something that we tried as much as possible to make to be part of the entire fabric of the work. So initially, when I was conceiving the material, I did with Claire what we always do and what I do with most of the friends that I work with, which was to intensely workshop with them and to find the sounds that would feed into the piece. So this is clip number 2. This is low E without the A key.
What the French?
Can you go between the just those two? Can you attack that chord like first thing? Awesome.
Wow.
So finding different sounds with Claire and finding different gestures, in order to actually build the flute part, the flute element of the piece was perhaps the most familiar thing within the process for me. What was actually much less usual for me was to think of how to organize things for the the rest of the performers in a way that was as involved as it was for Claire. So notation, for instance, becomes an issue, and even having to use graphic notation could potentially be an issue. So what you have here is a little bit, a sample of the visual elements that come within the score. The one on the top left is the entire diagram of the sitting position of the performers, because a way that we found that was effective to organize sounds in a narrative way was to think choreographically. If people had specific positions, that we could have commands, movement, embodiment commands that could, start and end sounds, and we could control different parameters of sound. What you have on the right side of your screen is my own diagram for myself of the order of events and how they could occur. And at the bottom left, what you have is one of the many cheat sheets that we gave to the performers, with like a narrative presentation of the order of events and some codings, with shapes and colors about, different parameters of sound. And I should say that improvisation is very much an element of this piece as well. So there were some fixed elements, but there were some elements that were not that fixed. And this variety of notation was extremely helpful. This flexibility towards how to notate was extremely helpful on the creation of the piece. So yesterday, I had the pleasure of watching a presentation by my dear friends Tyshon Sori and King Britt, and they were showing their new work together, which, by the way, you gotta run and see what they're creating together. It's quite beautiful. And Tyshon said something that I thought it was extremely meaningful. He said, "Notation is the act of being." And I thought that just absolutely encapsulated everything, because we tend to think of notation, associated with graphism. And what Tyshon was talking about, if I'm not misquoting him, I hope I'm not, that notation is everything. The moment that you walk into a room, that is somehow notation. The moment that you start to communicate with people, you are notating. You are expressing desires, and you are guiding intentions in different ways. So on thinking of notation for me, and thinking of ways of being collaborative, cooperative, and questioning hierarchical structures, the way in which one communicates with others becomes key, And on thinking about that, I had other artists that I admire, that served as good examples. I identified 3 of them here, but there are many more. But today I'm talking about Paulina Oliveros, Anthony Braxton, and Raven Chacon, and how they influenced me. Pauline has been an old hero of mine, and let me say, now that I am at UCSD, I feel so deeply honored to be teaching at the school where she was a student and a teacher for many, many years. And her concept of deep listening has really sort of, stayed with me. She tried, with her experience as a composer, performer, improviser, and listener, to add to the idea of music as a practice the sheer enjoyment of sound and the awareness of sound around you. Not only the sound that you're making, but the sound that others are making, and how to think of it in an emotional way that is as intellectually powerful as any kind of scholastic approach to it. I love this little quote here that I isolated. It's from Some Sounds of Observation, and she says, "Many music departments are more concerned with analysis than with communication." And I actually came across it as I was preparing my music analysis course that I'm going to be teaching in the spring semester, and I was like, duly noted, that reminder was great for me, to not think of systems as something that we simply obey and that we receive them as sort of dogmatic constraints, but to think of systems in a way in which they can work for us. And in that sense, a composer that has also been very influential in my thinking is Anthony Braxton. Anthony Braxton is in many ways, for those who know, what what he has been doing for the past decades, a system builder, But what I think is beautiful about the way that Braxton builds his systems is that they are live organisms that define dimensionality in really exquisite ways. I think that one of the main aspects of Braxton's music that I find really appealing is how he reimagines time. So a little quote here on Braxton's practice. He says, "All compositions in my music system connect together. All instrumental parts in my group of musics are autonomous. All tempos in this music state are relative, negotiable, and all volume dynamics in this sound world are relative," which sounds like extremely open, but in reality, once you actually put them into practice, they are sometimes very strict guides. So, oversimplifying what, Braxton's work has been, but he has developed these two language types, which are really sort of like basic musical parameters, as guides for structure improvisation and also housing or organizing principle of his many systems, which he refers to as imaginary space music. And there are many, and they, and they keep on coming. There's Trillium, which deals with opera. There's Ghost Trains music, Echo Mirror House music, Zim music, Pine Top Aerial music. Each of those systems, they are somehow related in their DNA to one of the 12 language types. Some more loosely, some more closely. And once you actually are inhabiting one of those systems, they have within themselves their unique DNAs of the unique behaviors, that guide the execution of that music. And what is sort of perhaps the unifying element here is his sort of tricentric model thinking of incorporating abstract, concrete, and intuitive in really organic and interconnected ways. One could talk about Braxton's music for about 500 days and not cover everything. But what I would isolate perhaps as the most important element for my musical thinking is really this elastic thinking of what constitutes an event, and this sort of multifaceted way of thinking of what are the roles, the communal roles of the participants of that event. And finally, Raven Chacon, who is someone who I've been, I haven't had the pleasure to meet him yet, but, it's someone that I've admired for a very long time for a multitude of reasons. I love this quote: "I prefer to work in collaborative situations as these allow me to experiment in different mediums, to constantly learn new technologies, and to find new ways to use or not use sounds." And I find it very beautiful the way that the word technology is used there, because it's not necessarily about, tech. It's not about tech. It's about tools. It's about ways of dealing or manipulating ideas, manipulating concepts. So a lot of Raven Chacon's music involves, open instrumentation, amateur players, audience participation, and sometimes the audience is creating the work with him. Graphic notation, unconventional sound sources. He has this beautiful video of this work that is for rifles, and one of the cool things about what he does too is this emphasis on the ephemeral and site specificity. There are a lot of works that if you're not there, if you're not in that specific place at that specific time, it is gone. You can watch the video documentation, but it's definitely not the same. From 2009 to 2018, he was part of this interdisciplinary art collective of indigenous artists called Post Commodity, and I would deeply encourage you to watch their videos. It's really mind-blowing. And since 2004, with the Ether Quartet, he's been working as an educator in the Native American Composers Apprentice program with remote schools in the Navajo, Hopi, and South River Pima reservations, training young composers on writing for string quartet in a way that honors their creativity and empowering them to create beautiful works, gorgeous works that are then played by the Ether Quartet. So once we start looking at these creators and creators of that ilk, if you will, there are a few things, there are a few concepts that start to come to prominence as somewhat relevant. Syntax, empathy, inclusiveness, openness, pedagogy, iconography, improvisation, technology, transdisciplinarity, and equity. This is a universe. This is an entire universe, and each of these words here, would take a lifetime to fully explore. But the way in which I approach this bag of goods, of goodies, is as a loose guide on trying to question hierarchical models in a way in which is enriching both artistically and civically. And on doing that, that idea of author, listener, and audience has transformed itself into something which I find much more inclusive in my mind, which is idea, realization, and existence. And there is an interconnectivity between them as well. Idea and existence is ontological in nature, in which what is being discussed there is the being, and it's the transformation of the thing. What is the thing, and the existence of the thing, and trying to sort of watch how the thing progresses. And then the idea interrealization is an epistemological process. You learn how to learn, the thing. You decipher the thing in order to make the thing attainable. And in doing so, you come up with different strategies or different methods, if you will, of realizing the thing. And then once the thing is realized, and you are throwing that into existence, it's all about cognition and also embodiment. It's receiving the thing, and it's processing the thing through your skin. And what I think is really cool about this way of thinking of this tripartite structure is that, the initial three characters that we were isolating, the author, the performer, and the listener, they can exist in any part of the structure. This structure is not hierarchical. There is not necessarily a linearity to it or a directionality to it. The structure morphs, the structure rotates, and this structure is all-encompassing. The word that I struggle with, and perhaps it's a little bit of a personal enemy, is style. So I always say that I find that style is a consequence and never a cause. I think that when we talk about style, it's only really possible and perhaps productive to talk about it retrospectively, looking back and seeing what has been done. But as a contemporary creator, as you are doing your thing, as you're finding out, ways of doing your thing, thinking of style, for me, seems to be very constraining. The moment that I observe style within myself, the moment that I think of style within myself, I am making choices. And when I'm making choices that are, exclusionary in nature, I am missing out opportunities of existing within different environments and exchanging ideas with different individuals. So style, in the most traditional way of thinking about it, is something that I very much try, in a very sort of disciplined way, to keep at the very back of my head, or if I can help, completely out of my head. So on that vein, what I would like to do is to play two examples of two other collaborations and then talk about what may unify them in a language that is a non-stylistic language. The first example that I would like to play is a movement from my piece Meltdown Upshot, which was created with my friends from Dauniente, which is a contemporary music ensemble based in Chicago, and the punk rock band Deerhoof. So this is from Meltdown Upshot. It's called True False. That's clip number 3. And I would like to contrast that with a clip of a piece that I composed, I think 2 years after this one, called Landscape of Fear, written for saxophonist Ryan Muncy and trumpet player Peter Evans. So that will be clip number 4. love these folks, just ridiculous, right? I have the best friends. But what I also want to talk about is how perhaps superficially those two examples can sound very different, and they're supposed to sound different. And I think that that's sort of an important point to be made. I think it would be terribly oppressive for my part if the music that I composed for Downyanked and Deerhoof sounded exactly like the music that I composed for Ryan and Peter, or the music that I compose with these folks, because if I am to really be true to this idea of collaborative and cooperative endeavors and trying to re-examine hierarchical structures, whenever my partners change, the music should change. If the music stays the same, if the discourse remains the same, what I'm doing is transferring my ego from one experience to another. So divorcing myself from that thinking of style in a more traditional way actually is an enhancer of collaborative and non-hierarchical or less hierarchical thinking for me, because it sort of promotes artistic empathy in a sense in which, like all of the elements, and all of the subjects, within the music find a place for their voices. There are some elements there that I can see that are, intersections, my interest, for instance, on high virtuosity, just because, all of those folks are amazing at what they do. But the realization itself, how that occurs, is completely different. I mean, on the video of the Meltdown Upshot, you saw the score, which was somewhat traditionally written. However, that score was only effective to half of the musicians who were playing it, because the other half did not, read, Western notation at all. And the learning process was completely different. It was very like orally based or based on experimentation. And then with Ryan and Peter, knowing that both of them are fantastic improvisers, you have, as a score, sort of a flexible grid from which they can come back. So you have all the simultaneity as you expect, but you also have enough space there, enough porosity there that they can express themselves in full view, of and bring into the music what they are. Of course, that then the big question, which I am not going to even attempt at responding, or examining today in depth, is authorship. And that to me is the next chapter, like how do I talk about authorship? What does authorship mean? Like what owning, within a creative arena entails, and how can we divorce ourselves from any way of applying this idea of authorship in a way that de-emphasizes the collective structures. So as I said, all of those questions are just that, they're questions, and the way in which I deal with them is failing miserably at every single attempt, at every single step, and embracing the humility of the exercise, of failing and doing a little bit better the next time around. And I, there's no martyrdom associated to that. It's not that I enjoy suffering, through the process, but I feel that this posture, as a constant student, and this embrace of experimentalism, non-stylistically, but attitudinally and philosophically, is something that allows me to navigate the structures that come with all of this sort of pre-existing weights and pre-existing ranks in a much more democratic, open, and hopefully freer way. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
Marcos, that was amazing. And for those listening, we will, first of all, I want to take you up on a part 2 in terms of, authorship, because I think that is such an important conversation. We will be touching on it with the intellectual property lawyer in a few weeks. So I encourage people to join that, but this was a fantastic presentation, and I don't want to take any space because I know we have several composers who have incredible questions for you. So I'm going to actually bring on Nina. Nina, if you want to join us, we will listen to your question.
Hi, Nina.
Hi, Marcos. Thank you so much for your amazing presentation and for taking my question. My question is kind of related to what your last point was, which is about how art has really different purposes based on who makes it and who it's for. And for example, it's known as a source of comfort for wealthier, often white patrons, but it's also a much direr tool for self-actualization and employment and communication for lower income neurodiverse and BIPOC communities. And so my question is, how do these inherent differences affect the creative work itself, but also what art is allowed in certain spaces, and how can we redirect resources towards the communities that really need art the most?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you so much, Nina. I mean, I think that it starts with redefining space itself, right? I mean, I think that one of the main problems sometimes that we have is that rather than like embracing the paradigm shift, what we try to do is to adapt the house, and that doesn't quite work, right? Because the walls were built for a specific purpose, and once you actually shift away from that purpose, you get a wobbly house. You know, it's still a house, but it's wobbly. I think it's much more productive if the practice itself is reinvented. Now that's labor. That's a lot of labor, you know, and in order for the labor to actually take place, one needs resources. One needs the tools to build whatever comes next. And finding the resources becomes then a political game, right? You know, so it's not that, you know, the BIPOC artists don't have ideas that they want to put into practice. It's how to do it, you know, and I think that that is a beyond artistic push that needs to happen. That is a social, political, economical push that needs to happen, you know. So I find that it is a duty of artists to be civically engaged in a sense in which you are taking the discourse there. You know, you're talking about the ideas, of course, you're talking about the concepts, but you're also talking about allocation of resources. And, you know, like people like to say that we are experiencing a movement, right? But for us folks, you know, this is not a movement, that's a motion. It's a motion that the ictus was centuries ago. You know, it's just that, like, you know, people in power are starting to pay a little more attention. But I think that it's extremely important to use this moment, I'm not gonna say movement, you know, to use this moment right now to show the richness of the different paradoxes that we have to offer, to embrace them fully and to realize work, you know, not to wait outside of that, you know, rigid door, you know, of those rigid walls and try to exist within them, but to build our own homes, you know, and to build them confidently and beautifully, and hopefully with enough resources to keep them up.
Thank you, Marcos. Thank you, Nina. We can't wait to hear your work. You're writing for the National Sawdust Ensemble, so hopefully everyone will tune in. And thank you for the question. I'm going to ask Tanya Radzwa to join us. I think Tanya Radzwa is actually writing for the Jack Quartet.
Oh, there she is. Hi, Tanya Radzwa.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for this presentation. I have so many questions, but I'm going to limit it to one.
Time. It's unfortunate that Anthony Braxton has not won the battle yet, but.
Okay, we're time makers here. So, you know, score. I really love that you touched on that. It's interesting. You said, you know, Tyshawn's quote that notation is the act of being. throughout my undergrad, I always told my advisors that notation is where my music goes to die. And I said that because, as somebody who comes from indigenous practices, somebody who comes from an oral tradition, there has been a politic of notation and writing and ownership that has adversely, right, affected my people. And so in thinking about processes and how to even liberate the process for people who come from ancestral modes of and modalities of music making like myself, this is a very vital question. And so anyway, so this is what my question was, that as a composer drawing from my indigenous cultures, this is a question that I've wrestled with for a very long time. I was formally educated in Zimbabwe through colonial British centered ideas about music and art, and my indigenous music education was considered informal. So in addition to that, there was also a hierarchy that was created because I was taught to view Western practices as high art and my music and practices as low art. So my question then is, in thinking about equitable music making practices for Black, Indigenous people of color, creators like myself at the institutional and professional level, how do we mitigate this given that the barriers to entry are already predicated upon Western-centered processes and qualifications?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. I mean, one thing that I find that people don't realize, within Black people is the trauma that is within being a musician, of existing within, this sort of art, music, universe or whatever that is, that in order for you to come into it, there's so many aggressions that happen throughout the way that then what happens is that even when you get into a position of somewhat privilege, of having a wonderful commission or having some prominence, that you have been taught for such a long time to not connect with, the things that make you, that even when you have, quote unquote, the freedom to go there, you don't know how, or it feels wrong, and it feels very, it's not within your body, like it was once, and it has left. So I think that the process for me at least has been a process of reclaiming, how to walk away from colonization by reclaiming my own identity. But also understanding that we are inhabiting, as I was saying to Nina, we are inhabiting a space, right? We're coming into a house that has walls and it has the furnitures that were all there. But we are valuable and we are important roommates. So we don't need to deal with the furniture exactly the way that it is, if we want to be in that house, if we want to exist within the structures, that are presented to us, to exist within this world, they need to hear what will make us feel more valuable and make us feel more powerful or to have more agency within what they do. However, as I said to Nina, I think it's very important for us to not stop only at creolization, to not stop only at the adaptation itself. I think it's very, very important for us, for anyone who is not coming from, purely, and I use that word very dangerously, from that sort of Western practice, to think of tweaks and shifts, but to really think of departures. What does a radical departure look like? What are the strategies that would allow us to finally depart, for the spaceship to take off, and in that sense, we are still infants, just because the platform has not been presented to us, for a long time, and actually has been denied, for a very long time. So now I think that, a duty perhaps, and I don't want to use the word duty in a sense of like, oh, this is forced labor that we need to perform, but, an internal duty, a communal duty that I have, as someone who does not necessarily belong to the tradition within which I inhabit, is to be that, to create, to ignite, and to find ways in which, the true self of, of what I am and what I represent and what I want to say can exist in extremely sophisticated ways. Because the reality is the music that we call sophisticated and encultured is extremely limited. Once you start looking at music from other cultures, the richness, that we're not seeing, like when we think of like Western classical music, whatever the heck that means, it's all pitch, but it's fairly stupid when it comes to rhythm, when it comes to timbre. Like, we don't talk about timbre intelligently. We don't understand embodiment, right? Like the actual performance itself, like how the body deals with it. We don't know how to talk about emotional content, which when you think of music, that's a key element on understanding any kind of artistic expression. And there are no tools there for it. Even notation, like when we talk about traditional notation, what the hell does mezzo forte mean? Like, it means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. So it's a set of half-cooked, half-baked, inefficient tools that somehow gain prominence for political and cultural reasons, of course, that they have served some kind of music for a very long time, but time has been showing them to be highly inefficient, and that's when we all can come in and say, hey, look another way, look a different way. Right. Give me the microphone. Let me show you, and just show it, But I think that the best way of moving away from that kind of traumatic background is to acknowledge the trauma, acknowledge that it happened, and just take a U-turn. And go for broke and try as much as possible to do that in a safe but uncompromising way.
Good words. Thank you.
Thank you.
On that note, I think we won't have time for the third question. So thank you to Tanya Radzwa and to Nina, who are actually both writing for the Jack Quartet. And
great.
Cannot wait. And Marcos, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. There's going to be so many incredible points that you made swirling in my head, and I just can't wait for people to dive deeper into your music and into all the amazing points that you brought up.
Thank you so much, Paula, and I would like to send my love to the composers, who are part of this initiative. The act of composing nowadays during this crazy time is radical and brave, and I applaud you and I send you my love, and my heart is with you.
For those of you listening in, join us next week with the critic, Steve Smith. He'll be talking about the interdependence between critic and composer. Thank you, Marcos, and thank you to all listening in. Take care.
Bye, friends.
Ciao.